This programming will be recorded in case you miss it, and you want to share with friends and family, or anybody who you think would benefit from this. My name is Eddie Chavez Calderon. I am so excited to be here with all of you. I am the campaign organizer for Earl Aesthetic in partnership with Arizona Jews for Justice, who are presenting this event today. We were really excited about presenting this event, and in partnership with our great friend Zachary and Donna here, for a while now. So this has been just a pleasure and honor to organize here at Uriel Aesthetic. As we start to mobilize the progressive modern Orthodox movement, we really want to make sure that we really dig deep into our communities and dig deep into our advocacy. So I want to introduce our great speakers today, who have just been a blessing to organize with and to mobilize this programming. I'm going to introduce Zachary Katznelson. He is the policy director of the Independent Commission on New York City's Criminal Justice and Incarceration Reform. And we have with us Donna Hylton, the founder of A Little Piece of Light and a fierce advocate for the reform of the criminal legal system. So we are so excited that everybody's here. A little bit of the structure of the programming, we'll have opportunities for Q&A after the program. So as soon as the speakers both present, we will have a Q&A. You can either share in the chat room, or you can go ahead and unmute yourself, and we will call on you to ask individual questions. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it on. Donna, thank you so much for being with us. Donna's going to share a little bit about her story regarding how broken is our parole system.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Good afternoon or good morning, wherever you are in this country. Thank you for joining us. So, good question. How broken is our parole system? Well, I think I'll probably start with how broken our overall criminal justice system is. And then it comes in layers, right? And they're all connected. So I was sentenced to 25 years to life in New York State's prison system at the age of, I just turned 20. And regardless of guilt or innocence and crime or not, I was a young person sent into the system who had so much trauma and abuse that permeated my life, and no adult in my life that would help it and just be that positive role model or just the person to help. And oftentimes a lot of those adults represented systems that you feel oh well, I'm going to go to school and I'm going to go tell my school counselor because this is what you do when you're faced with harm, and then it blew up in my face and it turned against me. And so as a child you learn to be quiet, right? And especially girl children, there's a different dynamic there. And so those things happened throughout. And then I was walked right into a crime I couldn't walk out of, and then I was sentenced to 25 to life. And I went into a system that is so abnormal and so cruel and violent on its face, and its actual daily routine. It's such an abnormal and cruel and violent place. And then you have to acclimate, you have to adapt to the system itself. You have to adapt so you can survive, right? And you do whatever you need to do, necessary to survive, whatever it may be. Doesn't make it right or wrong. It just means that you're human and you're going to do whatever it is you can do to survive. Like when you're hungry, you want to eat, you need to eat. You're going to do whatever it is to do to fill that hunger, to take that hunger away, right? When you're tired and your body needs rest, you're going to find rest because your body must rest or it's going to collapse. So, these are real issues and things that happen, and we don't talk about that. And then after serving 27 years, I was paroled. After a hard fight getting out, with that part of parole, which is the board of parole, to even give you the opportunity now to have a second chance at, hey, I'm not that person that went in. I am an adult now, and this is who I am today. Please stop looking at me from back, 27 years ago, or 25 years ago. So I came out, and then I've never been in the system, didn't know anything. And I came out and, I was given a set of mandates that, I was told that I had to comply with. And then, after, talking to people who also on parole, I found that we all had the same set of rules, mandates that we had to follow, no matter what you were inside for. So if you had no history of drugs, none whatsoever, you had to take a urine test to see if you're on drugs, regardless if you've had drugs and had that experience or not. You know, I was one of the women, fortunately, who helped create programs when I was in Bedford Hills in the system. And so a lot of those programs that I created, I was now told that I must do again out here. But I'm like, I created them 10, I helped create it 10, 12 years ago and facilitated them. And you're telling me that I have to take them, and I have all these certificates and all these accomplishments for doing that, but I'm told that I must do that again. So I'm like, okay. So what I'm saying is that the mandates that are given to everyone that's released, we almost comply by, or we don't. Guess what? If you don't do this, we're going to send you back to prison. If you don't do this, we're going to send you back to prison. And so for me, after serving almost 3 decades in the system, now coming out an adult and trying to do this adult world out here, this life out here, and understand, trying to figure out my place in it and what I need to do for myself, I also had this looming over my head. If you don't do this, if you don't do that. So it's like a ping pong, you're playing tennis, you're watching, like, what do I do? What do I do here? If I get a job, but if you tell me if I can't report because I might be at work, but then you're telling me, well, you're going to show up and you're going to, you're going to make it known that I'm on parole, and that might not be the case over here. Or if I don't report because I have to be at work, well, you know what? I just might send you back to prison. So I'm framing the picture in that way because that is the reality in which vast majority of us, not all of us, who are impacted by the parole system face daily. I remember, and I was just having this conversation yesterday with a woman who used to be the head of reentry parole for New York State, that I remember I was on the train coming home. I was on my way home from work, and I worked in Manhattan. I live in Brooklyn. So I'm on the train, and I just happened, before I'm going over the, I think it was over the Manhattan Bridge, right? That I get the phone rang, and it was the parole officer. And the parole officer said, "Where are you? Are you home?" And now it's like almost, it's close to 9 o'clock. It's close to 9 o'clock. I had to work late. And I said, "Well, nope, I'm not." "But where are you?" I said, "Well, I'm on the train. I'm heading home, but I'm not home." So he said, "Well, I'm in front of your house." So I was like, okay, like, what was I supposed to do? Okay. So he said, "Well, how long do you think it's going to take?" And so, me and my acerbic wit, I was like, "You do know we're in New York, right? You're asking me, when am I going to get home?" First of all, I was stuck in a tunnel already. That's why I was still on the train. So I don't know what to tell you. I didn't even get over the bridge yet. And I had to say, that's the reality of it. But that moment made me nervous because, okay, you called me to tell me you're outside, you're in my home, outside my building, and now you're saying, well, when are you going to get here? And as simple as that, but it's life altering to those of us and people on parole, right? It's life altering, and we don't know what to do. And there's no way to go around it. There are no checks and balances. There are no systems or rules in place for us to address these things and say, hey, please allow me this opportunity for that second chance. I'm just trying to do what you do. I'm working, I'm going to school, I'm being a mother, I'm doing whatever it is that, that I know I need to do or I want to do because I'm trying to get my life back in some semblance of order. Or just live, survive, and do right, and be tax-paying productive citizens, because the vast majority of us do want to do that. You know how good it felt for me to receive my first paycheck ever for really working a job, and it took taxes out? I was happy. And then I was scared to death. I always felt so daunting because tax season came and I never had that experience in my life. And so I was like, oh my God. But you know, those things are what we look forward to. We want to be just like everybody else and do what everyone else does, a normal life. And it could be hard. We all have our ups and downs and bumps and stuff. But at least don't try to penalize us and criminalize us or weaponize those bumps. If I have a misstep, don't weaponize it. If I go out and have a drink and you can't be having a drink, I just feel like, hey, let's celebrate. Hey, you know, or just being, it's a social thing and just want to just be like everyone else. But don't make that an issue to say, well, you know what? I'm going to send you back to prison. Because no, you shouldn't be like everyone else. You shouldn't you shouldn't have an opportunity like everyone else, because that's really what you're saying. That's what you tell people, really what you're saying to people on parole. So I hope that gives you an understanding of what that life is like. And mine was a little simpler than a lot of people that I help. It's not that easy.
Thank you so much for sharing with us. Zach, give us some more insight, brother.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me, Eddie, and thank you everybody for joining today. Really grateful that you're here. You know, listening to Donna and the notion of, you know, people coming out of prison want to be able to live their lives. They want to be able to come back to our communities. They're our loved ones, our friends. They want to come back. They want to be able to live. They want to be able to thrive, just like all of us do. And the parole system, if you can envision a system that you would set up for people coming out, a parole system where you would want to have a system, I would think, that would try and do everything possible to encourage somebody and help somebody achieve that success. Because the goal of the system for parole should be that that person who's coming out of prison never goes back, right? They never return to incarceration again, because that will be a real sign of success. You know, chances are if they are going back to prison in terms of having committed a new crime, that means there's more harm out there. There's another victim out there, that somebody has been hurt or property has been damaged. Something has been done that doesn't help anybody. And the last thing we should want is for that person to go back. But the system that we have today, as Donna was kind of describing, there are all these tripwires there, right? To the bumps that people hit, and that they all too often, the way the system is set up is pushing people back towards jail and prison, pushing people back towards incarceration. I've been a lawyer for over 20 years. Pretty much that entire time I've worked in the criminal legal system. I've worked every step of the way, from people just starting and just being arrested and charged with crimes, all the way up to people on death row, fighting not to be executed. And every step of the way, you see a few things that stand out. First of all, how does somebody come to be in prison in the first place? Donna touched on a little bit of her story. There's a lot there that I'm sure she could spend a lot of time unpacking. But there are these inflection points in people's lives, right? Where if an adult, for instance, for a lot of children, if one caring adult had stepped in and tried to intervene, the trajectory of somebody's life could have been really different. And far too often, what somebody gets is trauma and abuse and exposure to violence, and sometimes mixed with issues of mental health and homelessness and poverty. And you get this mix, and when society around and the adults around, and even as someone grows up, others around don't intervene in a positive way, these traumas, these experiences pile up. And at some point, they boil over in some ways, and somebody ends up in prison. Somebody ends up oftentimes committing harm. And when they're in prison, in theory, there are programs available to help people. Donna was talking about how she helped set some of those up, but all too often those aren't actually available for folks. And when people are coming out, they need support still. They need structure. They need help because when you come out of prison, the level of discrimination, the challenges that people face to try and rebuild their lives, get back on their feet, is truly tremendous. You know, to try and find a landlord who's going to rent you a place to live, to try and find an employer who's going to hire you and offer you a job despite your criminal record, try and find a school that's going to give you a seat in their classroom despite your criminal record, to try and find all these things is incredibly difficult. And if you're able to achieve them and able to achieve some form of stability, you have this threat that hangs over you that Donna was describing about, you know, that parole officer waiting outside your front door for you to be late for your curfew, whether you're at work or not, you know, and your freedom, your ability to rebuild your life, to be in our community, to thrive, depends on almost the goodwill of that individual. Because the system has given that person every right, and far too often is exercised, to send you right back to jail or prison, to lock you up, because you have violated one of these rules for people on parole. Now, it would be one thing also if there were really good evidence that you know, if someone follows all these rules and if they violate the rules, they get sent back to jail, that actually helped public safety. You know, I think some people might think, well, you know, you've come out of prison, you need to live on the straight and narrow, you shouldn't get any leeway whatsoever. But there is, you know, there are many studies done. There's virtually zero evidence that this method of approaching somebody and when they return from prison, of constantly kind of watching for them and ripping them back out of the community and throwing them back in jail, actually succeeds in increasing public safety. The evidence just is not there. Because, I mean, if you think about it for a minute, if somebody's homeless and grappling with those challenges, putting them in prison is not going to solve that problem. If someone is grappling with mental illness, putting them in prison is not going to solve that problem. If somebody is grappling with drug addiction and battling those addictions, you know, whatever the underlying issues that are there, putting them in prison is not going to solve that problem. And what we should have is a system that works to address those issues, to provide support, to provide opportunity to people. We don't have it today. You know, I think about, I talk a lot with parole officers in my job. I talk to them about their experiences. I talk to them about what they would hope to see. And one thing that comes clear is actually they have, you know, even for folks that do want to do the best they can to support the people that are on their caseload, they have overwhelming numbers. You know, they cannot develop relationships with people. They cannot spend the time to find, help someone find a job, to help someone find treatment or education. You know, and the incentives for them are completely skewed. You know, I'll give you an example of how it works in New York. I was talking to somebody recently, a woman who's a parole officer who one of her clients, one of the people on parole, was suicidal. And she went with him to the emergency room. She stayed with him for hours until his family could come and join. And she went back to her office the next day and she put in for overtime. And her supervisor denied her overtime. Said that wasn't part of your job. You shouldn't have stayed. Her colleague, the next desk over, the night before, had stayed late to write up somebody, to violate somebody and send them back to jail because they had drunk alcohol, which is a violation of the rules of parole, and they hadn't turned up in time for their appointment with the officer. That person got overtime approved. And those kind of messages resonate with parole officers. And maybe they'll, you know, this woman, God bless her, I'm sure she will actually probably continue to help people, but you can imagine the incentive. It's like, why am I bothering? Right? My bosses don't care. I'm not going to get appreciated for, I'm not going to get, you know, compensated for this time that I'm away from my family doing this job, trying to do the right thing, trying to help somebody. The incentives are all wrong. It reminds me of there's a verse in Deuteronomy, right? One we all know quite well, right? Tzedek, tzedek tirdof, justice, justice shall you pursue. And that's obviously a commandment that many of us take to heart. But the verse continues. The next two words are laman tirech, because excuse me, because, and it means justice shall you pursue, so that you shall live, so that you shall thrive. Because when we pursue justice, it is in our self-interest too. When we are just to others, it helps us, it helps our entire community. Because if we want a system where people coming out have the best chance at success, we need to build a system that does that. In the United States today, we send back roughly about 80,000 people a year back to prison for these technical, non-criminal parole violations. Things like missing curfew, things for missing appointments with parole officers, things for like using alcohol or drugs, things that people would not normally go to prison for, but because they're on parole, they get sent back. 80,000 people a year. And there are actually 2 states in the country that make up about 20% almost 20% of the folks that get sent back, Illinois and New York. New York is actually the worst in the country in terms of the number of people sent back for these types of violations, or to be imprisoned to receive drug treatment because they violated their parole by using drugs. And the question really is this working? Is this helping? Is this achieving what we want to achieve? Because when you talk to the parole officers that I talk to, they say, no, it's not actually helping the folks that we want to. We can't spend the time that we want to because our caseloads are so big, because we are spending this time going to parole hearings trying to revoke people, because we have these perverse incentives. When you talk to people on parole, like Donna, this is not a way for them to be able to feel free enough to live their life, to reestablish their lives. And certainly when you talk to victims of crime, when you talk to other folks, you ask them what they really want in terms of accountability for somebody. And usually the 2 things they say are, I want to know why somebody did it, but I also want to make sure that they never hurt anybody again, that they never do something like this again. And so that should be the goal of our system. If we want to honor everybody that's engaged and involved in this, we want to honor victims, we need to make sure that the system is set up so that people do not commit crimes again. We're failing right now in that. We're sending people back to prison and jail for these technical violations. We're destabilizing folks, and we're not getting a public safety gain. What we are doing is spending an insane amount of money. Now, across the country, we spend billions on this incarceration, but in New York City, to send somebody back to jail in New York City for one person for 1 year, it costs $450,000. $450,000 for one person for 1 year. What are we getting for that money? What are we getting for that quote unquote investment? Because almost nobody I know comes out of jail better off than when they were before. And certainly if you're on parole, with all the strikes that are against you already, with all the things that are challenging for you to try and rebuild your life, going back into jail for a few weeks or months or even a year or more, it doesn't help you when you come out. It feels like when I talk to folks as well, this kind of constant repunishing, and people say, like, I may have committed harm. That's why I went to prison in the first place. I did my time. I'm trying now to live my life in the community, to try and be part of this community, to be part of our world. I'm trying as hard as I can, but I feel like I'm constantly being punished. In Deuteronomy, there's a chapter 25 lays out kind of the law for what happens when a judge is deciding if someone is guilty or innocent, and the person could be subjected to punishment. And it says that the person can be subjected to up to 40 lashes, but no more. Because if you give more than 40 lashes, your brother will be degraded before your eyes. And there are a few things that are in there. One is that this person who has done wrong, the judge has found is guilty of a crime, they're still your brother. Even when they're being beaten, even afterwards, they're your brother. And that doesn't change. And then if you overpunish somebody, the kind of classic interpretation is that person is beaten down so low that the humanity is stripped, that they are debased before our eyes. But there is another interpretation as well, that for somebody who is overpunishing, for either the judge who assigns too many lashes or the person that is actually doing the beating, or all of us who endorse a system or don't work hard enough to change it, that we are debased before our brother's eyes. And our brother in this case is the person who's being beaten, but we're the ones being debased because we have done wrong. And so we're under these commandments to try and re-envision how we can actually approach parole. How can we actually change the way that we approach the situation of people coming out? How do we try and ensure that they live and they thrive? How do we pursue justice that's necessary? In New York, we're working on legislation to try and change this. There's an act called the Less is More Act. It's been proposed in the state legislature, which would really try and say, listen, we're going to treat things differently. We're going to have graduated sanctions instead of incarceration if somebody's not following parole. We're going to give positive incentives for people. So that if they have a month where they're on parole and they don't have a violation, let's take some time off their parole term. Let's give a positive incentive to help people comply with the rules. And these aren't novel ideas. These are things that have been tried and tested in states around the country, states that sometimes surprise people. States like Louisiana, states like Missouri, South Carolina, Alaska. They've all tried parts of these things, sometimes a whole package of these changes to parole, because they were seeing the same things that we see in New York, which is that this isn't working from a public safety perspective. It's not helping people rebuild their lives. It's costing an insane amount of money. And it is actually causing active damage to the people who are on parole. And so these states, when they've done this, they've actually seen parole caseloads come down so those officers can actually pay attention to folks who need help, who need support. They can actually have the time and resources to do that. They've saved a lot of money on incarceration, $450,000 per person in New York. Now, the New York City jail system is probably the most expensive jail system, certainly in the United States and quite possibly in the entire world. So I don't want to say that every place would save that much money, but it costs on average, I would say $50,000, $30,000 to $50,000, depending on jurisdiction, sometimes higher, $75,000 a year per person in the average place across the United States. If you don't lock that person up, the money can be invested in people, in prevention, in victim services, and a whole host of things that are a lot better investments than what we have now. And these states that have done this, that have tried these reforms, they also see recidivism go down. So for people on parole, they commit fewer crimes when the system doesn't punish them again and again and again, where they're not having to dodge and jump over these constant tripwires, where they feel like their life is either unstable because of all the barriers to reentry, where parole doesn't actually help lower any of them, but raises them higher. When you have to choose between working a job, when your boss says to you, I want you to close up tonight, you have to stay late. And you say, well, I'll be late for my curfew. He says, well, I need somebody to do this. Do you want to work here or not? When you have to make these choices, that's not in anyone's best interest. And so we have tried and tested models from across the country. They work. They help people who are on parole. They help public safety. They save money. They help all of us get closer to the biblical challenge to us to pursue justice, to not be debased before each other's eyes, to actually lift each other up so that we may live, that we may thrive. And that's our challenge, is to try and grow those opportunities of reform across the country, of reform for everyone involved, so that we can have a system that actually starts to work for all of us. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're going to go ahead and move to our Q&A discussion side of this. I'm going to go ahead and take the opportunity of hosting to ask a question to Donna. As a DACA recipient, as y'all see, my beautiful background is a butterfly that represents DACA. I know far too well what it is to live with constantly checking what you're doing, because any little issue could get me deported. That is the reality that I live with, that if I were to be publicly drunk, it could get me deported. If I could land in any legal issue, it could get me deported. What do you do to hold and center yourself? How do you keep your mentality? How do you, in simpler terms, from going crazy? What is it that you do? Because I find myself and a bunch of other DACA recipients and some of my friends who are in the criminal justice system, that sometimes it's very difficult to deal with. What tips, advices can you give?
Thanks for sharing that with us, Eddie. It is difficult, right? So, you know, the things that we go through, the things how we process things are subjective, right? Like it's our individual thing, right? So I'm always careful and mindful, like how I respond to people when they want like what I did, right? Because what I did worked for me, right? So I would say to you, you know, you already know those things that they have over looming over our heads at any moment. You know, we have to walk on so many eggshells, like go crazy. Like, how do you dodge them, right? Dodging, eggshell bullets and all that. Um, so what I did was just stay steadfast and like kept in my mind what I needed to do, and you know what I mean, and just did it to the best of my ability. Am I perfect? Was I perfect? No, because you never know. Because let's be real, if the system wants you to be wrong, you will be wrong. If the system wants to say you are whatever, they will categorize you as such, right? They set us up to fail. They don't set us up to win. They really don't. Just like with parole, like someone Zachary was saying, parole, the institution of parole was created to help the process, help you in the reentry process when you came out. It's like a social service kind of thing. Now it's a weapon, right? It's this institution that is, I mean, first of all, absolute power corrupts absolutely, and that's what it has. It's been corrupted, and it continues to cause harm. The situation with DACA, right? The battle with that. I mean, it's basically very, very similar. The only thing that we can do is do the best that we can in the moments that we can. To walk the line that you know how to walk. And that's it. Unfortunately, we don't have a good response. We don't have an answer to it because we don't have those systems yet. We still are dealing with archaic, cruel, and inhumane systems that force people into situations to hurt us, to criminalize us, to incarcerate us, to label us. First of all, the term immigrant in itself, you know, I mean, and Torah speaks to this, right? Exactly. I'm sure others, we know that strangers to a land should be treated with love and care. You would treat the stranger that's come into your land the same way as you would treat your neighbor, right? Anybody else. So it's just hard to even know how to respond to that because we know that we're facing systems that don't treat us in that way. And that's why we need all of these systems abolished at some point. But we have to work on these things. We have to work on it incrementally to get to where we need to go. So the only thing I can say to you, my friend, is to do the thing that you know that you could do for yourself and just be fortified. Have that good support, know the laws, the rules, or whatever, and just have somebody on speed dial. Because there really is no answer for that.
Thank you. I appreciate it so much. This is a question for both of you. How is advocating for a just criminal justice system a Jewish issue? And why is it a Jewish issue?
I guess for me, it's some of the things I touched on, but it's this notion that we are a community, that we need to look out for each other, that one of the most important values in Judaism, of course, is that we're all created in God's image, and the the commandment general though it is of Tikkun Olam, of kind of trying to repair, the rents in the world, the way it was taught to me was that when people are harming each other in this world, that it's our responsibility to stand in between, to get proximate, to get in there and really try and change things. And that's how we live best to our values. And this is just one manifestation. I think the parole system is one manifestation of a whole host of problems. But the issue of race, for instance, is really front and center. At every stage of the criminal system, race plays this outsized role, this discriminatory role. You can control for everything that might impact how and why somebody is in the system, in terms of the poverty, in terms of mental health, in terms of drug addiction, in terms of the crime they're alleged to have committed. Control for anything, and there's still, at every single stage, there are these unexplainable gaps as to how someone is treated. That the only factor left is race, the color of somebody's skin. And in parole, the way that manifests, for instance, in New York City, is that a Black person on parole is 12 times as likely to be violated for these technical violations of parole rules and sent back to jail than a white person on parole. 12 times. And so when I think about how, when that injustice is there, when it is blatant, it feels like we're compelled to act as Jews, to try and be proximate to the problem, to try and be engaged, to try and fix it.
Thank you. Donna?
So, and just full disclaimer here, full disclosure here, I also am a Jew. So just to know that. But I have to say, as a person that has learned a lot of other religions and dogmas and stuff like that, the basic tenet of all of them, right? The basic tenet, the premise of all of them is love. Love. That's it. Torah, New Testament, I forgot the book of Zoroastrianism, the Quran, all these things. Love is the basic tenet of all of it. We, in our own humanness, muckiness, have ascribed so many other things, right, to it. And so it's how we treat people, how we treat based on ethnicity and so-called. Race didn't even exist. Let's be clear. Torah doesn't even talk about race, right? Talks about tribe, right? Ethnicities, stuff like that, territory, right? There's nothing. Race was not even a thing until not too long ago. Right? But that's when we wanted to class people, put them in certain categories so that we can criminalize them or enslave them, right? Because we look at Torah, we talk about slave, it still had nothing to do with that, right? So for me, the whole premise of the whole thing of this, the whole gist of this is love. How do we treat each other? How do I treat my neighbor? How do I treat the stranger from another land? How do I treat myself? Because how I do that is the way in which I will represent Elohim, God, Abba, right? Allah, whatever you want to call it. But that's it. But that's not what we see happening. That's not what you see happening. That's why, taking up the mantle to do this work, it's difficult. It's hard because we're not just fighting systems, we're fighting ideologies, right? Beliefs. We're fighting, and we can see what happened not too long ago, just a couple of weeks ago, right? How that manifests when you try to create a whole nother set of ideologies and systems or whatever. It's crazy. But if we just center it and focus and love, and know that all that we exist because of love. Everything in this world and in the universe exists because of love. We would be able to do much more. We would be able to then center ourselves in seeing and understanding, why is my neighbor hungry? Why isn't that child able to go to school and get the opportunities like that other child gets? Why is that country so destitute, and what's going on over here? So all that is love. Why do we continue to criminalize people and not look at the reasons why they're doing the things that they're doing, if they're doing them? Why do we create systems to continue to harm and to create more violence and trauma, as opposed to looking at the individual in this individual situation and addressing that and focusing on that? So for me, that's what it's about. It's about love. And that's what we do the work here, a little piece of light. That's our cornerstone, because we know that that's what it's supposed to be. We do things from a harm reduction lens because we meet people where they're at. Why don't we start meeting people where they're at instead of forcing them to be what we want them to be and who we think they should be? Because then we take away their individuality, because then they're no longer who they should be, right? They were born to be. We should nurture that and not nurture our own ideologies and dogmas and all these other things that really cause harm. Cause harm.
Thank you so much. Again, folks, I'm going to remind everybody, we are going to move into our Q&A section. We already have some questions from the Facebook live stream here. And the question reads, how much power do parole officers have over you?
Donna, you want to take that first?
Yeah. I was like, well, I had to inhale on that one. How much power? So I'm here at work. This is my organization. I built this with my team. I'm right now on this panel, right? Talking about parole. Parole officer could come in anytime, walk in your house, your place of business, walk right in. See that I'm on here talking about parole, or just on here, Zoom, and could create a situation out of this to say, you are going to be violated. We have to be clear. I want the people on the Zoom to understand, a technical violation is not a crime. When people are in danger of being technically violated, they have not committed a crime. They've just done something that parole has said you shouldn't be doing. Oh, you know what? I'm going to criminalize that. I'm going to weaponize it, and I'm going to send you back to prison. But you didn't commit a crime. If I jaywalk, I go out and I don't cross at the light, and I cross in between. You remember that? Those of us who remember that commercial, right? I could be facing a technical violation because that's jaywalking. Something as simple as that. That's how much control and how much authority and power that parole has in a person on parole's life. And I'm saying the simplest things to you so you can really understand how we have to walk daily. Every day that we wake up, it's like hanging on the edge of a cliff, because you just never know what they're going to do. God, Zach, you want to say that?
No, I think you summed it up beautifully. I just feel like a lot of the reality of parole officers is that a lot of it is about how comfortable they are actually pushing back against the rules. and whether or not you're lucky enough to have somebody who's supervising you who actually is willing to say, you know what, I'm not going to do exactly like I'm supposed to, because if I do, you're going straight back to jail. And what I often find is that the more junior an officer, like the newer on the job they are, the less freedom they certainly feel in their ability to do that. And, you know, in New York City, for instance, turnover in Manhattan and Brooklyn, which are the two biggest parole offices in the state, every year, 50% of the officers turn over, right? Brand new officers come in. So they're constantly junior people. If you're there for more than a year, you're the supervisor at the office. And even then, you don't feel like you can go against what the rules are. And that's the only real route to the chance that people have, is if an officer is willing to buck the rules. If they buck the rules and something goes wrong, they're told they will be entirely responsible. The officer will be responsible. They will be suspended. They will be fired. And so the incentives, as I said before, the incentives are so skewed for those officers to try and actually help people, to try and actually support people and help them thrive.
Thank you so much. Folks, again, reminder, you can unmute yourself if you want to ask a question, or you can type it into the chat. Go ahead and type in right now, or just unmute yourself if you want to ask a question.
Hello.
Oh, I'm sorry. I missed. Yes, go ahead.
Hi. My name is Marion Bay, and I work with the City of Newark's reentry program. And I just wanted to say to you guys, this is just so overwhelming to me to listen to the stories that Zachary and Donna described. But it kind of reminds me of when I worked in the system, how the guards would hold their badges over the inmates there, threatening them if they were to do anything, they would send them back. So I'm wondering, how can we overcome that? I mean, you know, if we're going to really help brothers and sisters who are inside, how do we overcome that with the staff that we're working with? Because as Donna said, it's how we treat each other that makes the difference.
So Miriam,
That's my question.
you were saying how do we get to the staff?
Yeah, like when I worked in the system, the staff would hold their badges as a mechanism to, if you don't do what I tell you to do, I will send you back to prison, similar to parole officers.
Yeah. So you know,
so it really starts on a lower level, and it masses its way up.
So I'm always going to keep it real, right? My experience and what I know to be true. Unfortunately, a lot of the people that take on the role of correctional officer and the like allow that position to be a form of power and control in which they can abuse people.
Yes.
A lot of our correctional officers and staff and those that have a uniform or a role like that they supervise people or oversee people, you know where I'm going, allow that role to be an opportunity to abuse and to cause harm. And abuse comes in many forms, and harm comes in many forms. And unfortunately, we can't just look at the system without looking at the people. Right. The system was created, but the system is filled with the people that can perpetuate harm in many ways. Because as we all know, we've heard this before, hurt people hurt people. And if I have not dealt with my own harm, my own trauma, my own pain, oftentimes I lash out and I give it and I just pass it on.
To the vulnerable, to those who are
Absolutely.
vulnerable.
And predators know prey. And oftentimes
Right.
those that are preyed upon for a very long time become predators. It's just a reality. And that's where I was saying all of this stuff is premised in love, because if we care, if we treat people better, we treat people the way we would like to be treated. Sometimes we don't even know how we want to be treated because we weren't taught that. But for those that know that it's not causing harm and pain, then we have the opportunity to create a different set of systems or a different way of doing things. But we first have to look at individuals. And we've done some stuff where we had some trainings, and Skip, you're on this call. I'm not remembering. We had it. When I worked at the hospital for the coming home program for people coming out, we would train the staff on how cultural sensitivity, how to language, how language can harm or not harm, and how we address people and things like that. And we used to do that a lot, but I don't really see it happening anywhere.
No, right.
We don't have that cultural sensitivity where we can understand and cultural competence. Thanks, Helen. That we can understand, another person's life, or maybe the way of their culture, their language. I often see, I was inside and correctional officers was laughing at people and folk, targeting them because they had a different accent, or they had a different way of grooming themselves or whatever, instead of teaching someone, showing them, oh, there's other ways or whatever. We don't take time to do that.
Right.
So it's hard to say that because the system was designed to continue the perpetuation of violence and harm and trauma and abuse. So we have to start with individuals as well. We can do two things at one time. We're talking too well. So we can do this work. We can do these things at the same time. But we really have to focus, and we really want to do it and create these opportunities for those things to happen. Right? We have to push the system. We vote people in to do a certain thing. We can vote them out if they're not doing it. We can put people into these systems, these places where we know we can create these changes that we so desperately need. We can do this. But we don't, because we feed into the fear, the language, the narrative of fear that's been stoked and continues to be stoked daily. And so we've done this, well, that's them, not me. Or that's them, not us. Or I'm just going to turn an eye. And we've turned an eye away from children so much. It starts there. But look where we're at.
Thank you. Yes.
My-
Thank you.
My name is Cookie Rivera. I'm from the Latino Action Network in New Jersey, and I've been a criminal justice reform advocate for over 30 years. And we very much focus on New Jersey. And we're doing a lot of things here that speak to exactly what Donna and Zachary talked.
Did she get frozen?
Yeah, Cookie, looks like you froze a little bit. We'll come back to Cookie. Once you come
Talk about.
there we go. Cookie, sorry, you froze a little bit. Do you mind sharing again?
Oh, okay. Maybe I'll just go a little quicker. Zachary said something very important and blew me out of my chair while I'm sitting here about $450,000 a year.
Yes.
Person
Yes.
in blew me out the frame.
Right.
But there's something there. So the other part that he said about no incentives, that is the incentive to keep you where you are. I would point to New Jersey for you to watch us closely, because we just released over 3,000 prisoners from some emergency COVID relief legislation. And we're looking for reentry agencies out here and the things that will help you stay home. And that's a very challenging prospect as it is. But at the same time, if the incentive is money, because $450,000 per person pays a lot of paychecks. Pays a lot of paychecks. When you start to reduce the prison population and or parole population, you're also talking about jobs. So you have to really kind of follow the money, because right now in New Jersey, There's about 3,000 people out. That's an entire prison. We are again talking about jobs. 3,000 people took out all of the people who were a year short, not only from the state prison system, but as well from the halfway houses. Jobs, jobs, jobs. Will those dollars go into reentry type resources for Donna or Cookie to stay home safely or productively? Will they help her find housing or get her IDs, the simple things that Donna's talking about? Teach her how to read a bus schedule, things like that, when you've been incarcerated for many years. So there's that going on. You must follow that money and you must follow the legislation. We also have legislation here it's called Earn Your Way Parole, a revamping of New Jersey's parole system. And it was supposed to be implemented in August of this year. And we're still following that. Those of you who are interested in this, we host a media listserv called the Integrated Justice Alliance on Facebook. It's a public group that tracks this very well. And I think I would close this with this. We are in a moment in history that we've seen things we never expected to see in our lifetime, in the Capitol, in Black Lives Matter movement, in communities coming together in uncommon ways to, damn it, fight for what's right, excuse my French. But these are moments and obligations in time where we have to say, don't just go to a rally. Go home and teach your children. Find out what it is to vote because you're looking for a job. Why is that important to you and all of these things? But we're also in a moment in time where this new administration will adjust the way business has gone on. We've worked for 20 years and everything went backwards because of the last 4 years. But now you're in a historic moment in time where we have potential to genuinely make change or bring it back to where we were in the waterline. And immigrants and criminals or across the United States, you could say, there's a thing called crimmigration, where these two communities, the incarcerated community and the immigrant community through detention struggles, have joined forces, and there is power in unity. I would leave it with that, and I would thank you so deeply for even listening and just conducting this type of forum, because that's something else that you have to, we have to do more of. God bless you.
Thank you so much. Abe has a question for Zach. What are the odds of passing less is more, and what can people do to help?
Thank you. Thanks, Abby, for the question. Yeah, we're optimistic about passage of less is more in New York, but it's going to take work. We've actually been able to build a pretty unique coalition in the criminal justice reform arena around less is more. So often you have on one side of the battle line, so to speak, you have district attorneys and law enforcement officials thinking that we shouldn't have any change at all, and people who've been through the system saying, this should not operate the way it does. It's not working for us, for our communities, for our families. But in less is more, we actually have been able to bring those groups together. But we have support from district attorneys, from law enforcement officials, from judges, from people from across the spectrum, from people. The bill was written in large part by people who are actually on parole, people who've been through the system. But we have support of individual parole officers. It's a really unique situation where this is a bill that makes sense on so many levels. It would advance public safety. It would reduce parole officer caseloads. It would save a huge amount of money that, of course, is desperately needed now more than ever. Money that could be invested in people, in communities, in a way to try and actually help people. There's so many ways that this would help. It would decarcerate. In New York City, we're trying to close Rikers Island, which is a notorious jail complex there. But it's incredibly hard for us to do that if we can't get people who are jailed there for technical parole violations out, because there are hundreds of people that are in jail right now. And you can't close the jail if there are people still who are going to be locked up. Like, we need to get them out and open up that and put them back in the community where they can actually have their needs addressed. And so we're optimistic, but there is, in this time right now, politics are fraught. for sure. There has been a rise of crime in New York City. Now, it's not linked to people on parole by and large, but it is definitely changing some of the dynamics of politics right now. And so we need to keep pushing for racial justice that this bill will help bring, to keep pushing for the human justice that we all need. Like, this is just, it should be a win-win for everybody, but it doesn't mean that the politics will easily bend to us. So we have to keep pushing, getting in touch with our legislators and calling out for reform.
Thank you so much. Folks, it is 12 o'clock here in sunny Arizona. It is the hour mark for our event. I want to say thank you so much to both Zach and Donna for spending this time here with us. Just blew us away. I mean, there's always new innovative things that we all get to learn and know. But the gist of it is that these issues are cyclical, that what affects one thing affects directly the other thing. And that if we advocate for the rights of one community, we have to fundamentally understand that other communities are directly affected by the systems of oppression that continue to hurt our communities. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining this call. Again, Donna, Zach, you all are amazing. Keep up the amazing work. We will be posting the recording and links to get to know more about Zach and more about Donna's work in our AJJ Facebook and in Uriel Aesthetics Facebook. We encourage everybody to watch out for our next event. We are going to be joined by Rabbi David Polsky, and he's going to be talking about accountability in the setting of Jewish law for police officers. So that's going to be February 3rd at 4:30 p.m. Eastern Central. Make sure to follow us on all the social medias to keep in touch with all of our work. We appreciate you dearly. Have an amazing day. Take care.